While my wife was dying in the ICU, they manipulated me. I trusted them, Your Honor. I didn't know I was signing away my home.
Have you ever wondered if the black blindfold on the Lady of Justice is truly there to ensure impartiality? Or is it merely a velvet curtain for the powerful to hide behind? We are taught that everyone is equal before the law, but reality is often far more brutal. Imagine a cold Monday morning in a city courtroom where the air is thick with the smell of old paper and the heavy weight of anxiety. At the center of this room, a 2-year-old man, his hands trembling and covered in the calluses of a lifetime of hard labor, stands alone against a team of lawyers in suits worth thousands of dollars. They don't just want to win a case, they want to crush him. They want to prove that in this system, money and reputation can buy the truth. But they have forgotten one crucial variable. A man sitting in the highest chair, with eyes that can see through every lie and a heart that beats for the forgotten souls. That man is Judge Boyd. And today, the blindfold of justice is about to be torn away. At exactly 2 minutes past 9, the courtroom doors swing open. Judge Boyd enters. He doesn't carry the flashy aura of a politician, but his presence creates an invisible pressure that makes the entire room hold its breath. At 65 years old, his snow-white hair is a testament to decades spent facing humanity's darkest corners. His gaze is as sharp as a surgical scalpel, slowly scanning every face in the gallery before coming to a rest at the defendant's table. Sitting there is Elias Thorne. If you look at Elias, you see a map of endurance. The deep wrinkles on his forehead aren't just from age. They are trenches carved by years of sacrifice. His eyes are clouded but hold a heartbreaking honesty. Elias is not a criminal. He is a retired carpenter who spent his life building homes for others, only to find his own home threatened by a massive real estate corporation. Opposite him sits the plaintiff's table, the Vanguard Group. 4 lawyers, the wolves of the legal world, are whispering. They smile. It is a smirk of overconfidence. To them, Elias is nothing more than a small speed bump on the road to building a luxury complex. They represent the system, a network of power, currency, and legal loopholes designed to protect the strong. The lead attorney for Vanguard stands up, adjusting his silk tie. Your Honor, he begins, this is a simple case of breach of contract and illegal squatting. Mr. Thorne has refused to vacate despite receiving valid notice. We ask the court to enforce the eviction immediately to prevent further economic loss for our investors. He speaks of economic loss as if it were a living soul. He speaks of a contract as if it were holy scripture. Judge Boyd does not look at the thick file in front of him. He looks directly into the eyes of the young lawyer. A silence follows for 10 seconds that feel like a century. Counselor, Boyd's voice is deep and echoing, carrying the weight of a mountain. In this courtroom, we do not only value property by the number of zeros on a check, we value a life by its honor. You say this is a simple case? I see it as one of the most complex I have ever taken. Because today, I am not just judging an individual, I am judging the very system you represent. Elias Thorne looks up. For the first time in months, a tiny flicker of hope, thin as a strand of hair, begins to ignite in those old eyes. The real battle has only just begun. Marcus Sterling, the lead counsel for the Vanguard Group, rises with the calculated grace of a predator who believes the trap has already snapped shut. He opened a polished leather briefcase, withdrawing a document encased in plastic as if it were a holy relic of absolute authority. He holds it aloft for the gallery to see a shield made of ink and paper. Your Honor, Sterling begins, his voice smooth and cold as marble. Compassion is a noble sentiment, but the law is built on facts. This is the voluntary relocation agreement signed by Mr. Thorne himself 6 months ago. He accepted a check for $10,000. He took the money, he signed the paper, and now he is simply convinced to honor his word. A heavy murmur ripples through the courtroom. You can feel the shift in the air, the toxic cloud of doubt. The onlookers, who just moments ago were rooting for the underdog, now whisper among themselves, did this old man take the money? Is he just a squatter playing for sympathy? This is how the system works. It uses a single piece of paper to turn a victim into a villain in the eyes of the public. But Judge Boyd does not look at the flashy headlines of the document. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. His sharp eyes scanned the room with a surgical intensity. He signals the court clerk to bring the documents to the bench. He doesn't look at the bold signatures first. He flips the page to the back, to the dense thicket of microscopic text, where the real law is hidden text so small it looks like a smudge of gray dust. "Mr. Thorne, please step forward," Boyd said. His voice is a low rumble that vibrates through the floorboards. Elias rises, his knees popping, his weathered hands gripping the rail so hard his knuckles turn white. "I want you to do something for me, Elias. Look at this document. Read the fourth line on the back page for the court." The old man takes the paper. His hands tremble so violently that the page rattles like a dry leaf in a storm. He squints, his eyes watering under the harsh fluorescent lights. After a long, agonizing silence, Elias bows his head, his voice a broken whisper. "Your Honor, I can't. It's all a blur. My eyes gave out years ago under the sawdust of the workshop, and that night, I didn't have my glasses. I didn't have anything." "Exactly," Judge Boyd snapped, turning his gaze toward Sterling like a predator locking onto its prey. "Because this font is less than 1 millimeter tall. It was designed to be invisible to the naked eye. Now, counselor, tell this court exactly where and when this voluntary agreement was signed." Sterling fumbles with his silk tie. His composure begins to crack. "It was standard field procedure, Your Honor. Our agents met with him to... I asked where and when." Boyd thunders. The sound strikes the room like a gavel on an anvil. Elias Thorne looks up, tears finally spilling down his deeply lined face. "It was in the hallway of St. Jude's Hospital," he chokes out. "It was 2 a.m. My wife, Mary, she was in the ICU. The machines were screaming. These men came to me and said the company wanted to help with the medical burden. They said it was a gift of mercy so Mary could have the best care in her final hours. I thought I was buying her a peaceful end. I didn't know I was selling the roof over my head while my wife was taking her last breath." The silence that follows is deafening. It is the sound of a courtroom realizing they aren't witnessing a legal dispute, but a corporate execution. Judge Boyd leans forward, his face a mask of righteous fury. "In this court, we do not recognize agreements signed in the shadow of a deathbed. This wasn't a contract, counselor. It was a robbery with a signature. And today, Vanguard is going to find out what happens when you try to swindle a man under my watch." Marcus Sterling doesn't flinch. He is a man who has traded his conscience for a corner office and a view of the skyline, and he knows that in the world of high-stakes litigation, whoever blinks first loses. He leans into the microphone, his voice regaining its oily smoothness. "Your Honor, let's be clear. While the circumstances at the hospital are undeniably tragic, Mr. Thorne is a competent adult. He was presented with a choice. He chose the money. He chose to sign. The Vanguard Group provided a financial bridge during his time of need. We are a business, not a charity, and the law protects the sanctity of a signed agreement. If we allow every defendant to claim grief as a reason to void a contract, the entire economic system will collapse into chaos." Sterling looks around the gallery, his eyes searching for approval from the other suits in the room. He is playing to the system. He is reminding everyone that the gears of the world are greased with the blood of the desperation, and that to stop those gears for one old man is a dangerous precedent. Judge Boyd's expression doesn't change, but his fingers tap rhythmically on the bench, a sign that the storm is brewing. "The sanctity of an agreement? Counselor? That is a beautiful phrase, but sanctity requires light. It requires two parties standing on equal ground, seeing the same truth. Tell me, when your agent walked into that ICU at 2 a.m, did he bring a lamp or did he bring a shadow?" Boyd turns his attention to a young man sitting behind Sterling, a junior associate named David Miller. David has been fidgeting with his pen for 20 minutes, his face a pale shade of gray. "Mr. Miller, step forward," Boyd commands. Sterling tries to intervene. "Your Honor, Mr. Miller is not the lead on this case." "I didn't ask for the lead. I asked for the man who was actually in the room," Boyd snaps. David Miller slowly approaches the bench, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He looks like he's walking toward a firing squad. "Mr. Miller," Boyd begins, his voice softening but retaining its razor edge. "You were the one who held the clipboard for Elias Thorne that night, weren't you?" David nods, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. Look at Mr. Thorne, Boyd says. David hesitates, then turns to look at Elias. The old man is still trembling, his face a map of sorrow and sawdust. When you handed him that pen, did you tell him he was signing away his home? Did you tell him that the $10,000 was not a gift of mercy, but a purchase price for the only place he has left on this earth? David Miller looks down at his polished shoes. The silence in the courtroom is so heavy you can hear the hum of the air conditioning. Sterling is glaring at his junior, a silent warning burning in his eyes. I followed the script, Your Honor, David stammers. The company policy is to secure signatures as quickly as possible during critical transition windows. They told us that's when people are most receptive to financial assistance. Critical transition windows, Boyd repeats, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. You mean when a man is so broken by the thought of losing his wife that he would sign a pact with the devil just to keep her comfortable for one more hour? You didn't find a receptive client, Mr. Miller. You found a wounded soul, and you harvested his desperation. Boyd leans back, his gaze returning to Sterling. Counselor, you talk about the collapse of the economic system. I am more concerned with the collapse of the human spirit. You didn't just buy a house that night. You stole a man's grieving process. You turned his final moments with his wife into a boardroom transaction. And in my court, that isn't just unethical. It's a violation of the very essence of justice. Elias Thorne wipes his eyes with a tattered handkerchief. He isn't just crying for his house anymore. He is crying because for the first time in 6 months, someone has acknowledged that his pain was weaponized against him. The powerful system is no longer a faceless wall of stone. It is being unmasked, one lie at a time, under the cold, bright light of Judge Boyd's courtroom. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from mere tension to a deathly silence, the kind of stillness that precedes a devastating storm. David Miller's confession, a sudden flicker of conscience in a dark system, had struck a lethal blow to Vanguard's polished exterior. But old wolves like Marcus Sterling do not retreat just because of a single wound. They know how to weaponize their errors. Sterling rose, replacing his arrogant smirk with a mask of enacted solemnity. Your Honor, he began, his voice a calculated blend of rehearsed regret. We acknowledge that the approach taken by certain junior staff may have been insensitive. It was a failure of training, a procedural lapse. However, we cannot allow a mere emotional oversight to invalidate a legal binding document. The law is the skeletal structure of our society. If we allow it to soften under the weight of emotions, the entire framework collapses. Sterling was trying to steer the room back to cold, dry ink. He wanted to amputate morality from the law. He wanted Elias Thorne to be seen as a victim of a glitch rather than a victim of a systemic crime. But Judge Boyd did not follow his lead. He leaned forward, his eyes like twin lasers cutting through Sterling's mask. Insensitive? A procedural lapse? Boyd repeats, each word landing like a sledgehammer. Counselor Sterling, in this courtroom, we don't call the act of hunting, the dying in hospital hallways, insensitivity. We don't call it a glitch. We call it the harvesting of desperation. Boyd turned back to the trembling David Miller. Mr. Miller, you speak of a standard script. I want to see that script. Now, I want to see the instructions your company gave its employees on how to approach men like Mr. Thorne during their critical transition windows. Sterling's composure finally fractured. Hiding his panic behind a wall of legal jargon, he interfered. Your Honor, that is an internal document, a trade secret protected by trade secrets do not stand above human rights, Boyd thundered. His hand struck the bench with a sound like a lightning strike, echoing through the rafters. I order the Vanguard group to produce that training script immediately. If you have nothing to hide, Counselor, why do you fear the light? After 10 minutes of suffocating tension, a thin folder was placed on the judge's bench. Boyd flipped through the pages as the gallery held its breath. You can hear the hum of your own heart. As Boyd read, his jaw tightened, the fury visible in the very muscles of his face. He began to read a passage aloud. Note to staff. When a client is in a state of shock or grief, their logical processing capacity drops by 70%. This is the golden window to close the deal. Do not speak of buying. Speak of assistance. Do not speak of loss. Speak of release. A wave of horror washed over the room. Elias Thorne covered his face, sobbing uncontrollably. The greatest tragedy of his life had been calculated in percentages, planned like a dirty marketing campaign. Judge Boyd put the folder down and looked at Marcus Sterling with profound disgust. You spoke of the sanctity of a contract, counselor. I see only the sanctity of a vulture waiting for a carcass. You didn't just want Elias's house. You stole the final dignity a husband owed to his wife. Boyd stood up, his presence towering over the room as he looked toward the broken man at the defendant's table. Mr. Thorne, I want you to know that your home is not just a pile of bricks to be valued by soulless checks. It is a temple of memories. And today, that temple will be protected, because justice is never blind to those who use the darkness for profit. The courtroom air is no longer just heavy, it is electric, vibrating with the energy of a predator who has finally seen the glint of the trap. Marcus Sterling stands slowly, his face drained of color, but his eyes burning with a desperate, litigious fire. He knows the script was a disaster, but he is a creature of the system, and the system is built on layers. He prepares his final shield, the argument of economic progress. Your Honor, Sterling begins, his voice trembling slightly, but gaining strength as he leans into his familiar rhetoric. While the training materials may be aggressively phrased, we must look at the larger picture. The Vanguard Plaza is a $200 million investment. It will bring 3,000 jobs to this district. It will revitalize a decaying neighborhood that has been stagnant for 40 years. Mr. Thorne's house is a single, crumbling structure standing in the way of a future that benefits thousands. Progress requires sacrifice. Is it the position of this court that the nostalgia of one man is worth more than the economic survival of an entire city? Sterling looks at the gallery, trying to stir the common sense of the onlookers. He is attempting to make Judge Boyd feel guilty for being anti-progress. He is trying to make Elias Thorne look like a selfish relic of the past. Judge Boyd doesn't blink. He leans back in his leather chair, the wood creaking softly in the silence. Sacrifice, counselor? That is a word usually spoken by the person holding the knife, never by the one on the altar. You speak of jobs and revitalization as if they are a coat of paint that can cover a foundation of rot. You talk about decaying neighborhoods, but I see a man who spent 50 years keeping his corner of the world beautiful while your clients were busy calculating how to steal it. Boyd signals to the bailiff, bring me the financial audit of the $10,000 check issued to Elias Thorne. A new document is placed before the judge. Boyd scans it, a grim smile playing on his lips, a smile that sends a fresh wave of panic through Sterling's veins. Counselor, you told this court that the $10,000 was a financial bridge provided by the Vanguard Group, a gift of mercy during a critical window. Sterling nods, though his throat is visibly dry. Yes, Your Honor. Corporate social responsibility. Funny thing about responsibility, Boyd says, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This audit shows that the funds for that check didn't come from Vanguard's corporate accounts. They came from the Municipal Housing Grant, a government fund intended to help low-income seniors repair their homes so they wouldn't have to move. Your company didn't give Elias Thorne a dime of its own money. You intercepted a government grant, rebranded it as a voluntary relocation payment, and used public tax dollars to fund your private land grab. A gasp erupts from the gallery. This wasn't just corporate greed anymore. It was a systemic heist. Elias Thorne leans forward, his mouth hanging open in shock. He had spent months feeling guilty for taking their money, not realizing that the money was already meant for his roof, for his windows, for his dignity. You didn't just hunt him in the hospital, Boyd roars, his voice shaking the heavy oak doors of the courtroom. You laundered mercy. You took the very safety net the people built for their elders and turned it into a noose. You didn't give him a bridge. You sold him a ticket to his own execution and sent the bill to the taxpayers. Sterling tries to speak, but no sound comes out. The powerful system he represents is being stripped bare, revealing a skeletal structure of fraud and theft. Judge Boyd turns to Elias, his expression softening for a fleeting second, but his eyes remaining hard as flint. Elias, they told you that you were a burden standing in the way of progress, Boyd said. They told you your home was a decaying obstacle, but progress that begins with a lie is nothing but a landslide in slow motion. Today, we aren't just talking about your house. We are talking about the soul of this city, and I will not allow it to be sold to the highest bidder with a stolen check. Marcus Sterling is a man built of limestone and cold ambition, and even as the foundation of his case turns to dust, he clings to the wreckage. He knows that in the eyes of the public, he is now the face of a corporate monster, but in the eyes of the law, he believes he still has a shield. He stands, smoothing the front of his $1,000 blazer, his voice tight and desperate. Your Honor, let us be precise. Even if the funding source was unconventional, the fact remains that the statute of limitations for challenging this agreement has passed. Mr. Thorne waited 6 months. He cashed the check. Under the law, silence is a form of consent. We have already broken ground. We have contracts with steel suppliers and unions. You cannot undo a $200 million project because of a technicality in a hospital hallway half a year ago. Sterling is leaning on the weight of the done. He is betting that the sheer size of the Vanguard Group makes them too big to fail, too large to be held accountable by one man in a black robe. He is telling the room that the past is dead, and only the future, the profitable, steel, and glass future matters. Judge Boyd watches him, his hands folded neatly on the bench. He looks like a man watching a moth fly directly into a flame. Consent, counselor? Consent requires a mind that is present, not a heart that is being hollowed out by grief. You talk about the statute of limitations as if it is a clock that starts ticking the moment you commit a sin. But in this court, the clock doesn't start until the light is turned on. And the light was turned on today. Boyd turns his gaze to Elias Thorne. The old man looks smaller now, drained by the revelations of the morning. Elias, Boyd says, his voice softening into a tone of genuine curiosity. Sterling says, your house is just a crumbling structure, standing in the way of a $200 million future. He says the neighborhood is decaying. Tell me, what do you see when you look at those walls? Elias Thorne slow stands. He doesn't look at the lawyers or the cameras. He looks at his hands, those thick, scarred hands that have spent half a century shaping wood. I see the door frame where I measured my daughter's height every birthday for 18 years, he whispered, the sound carrying to the very back of the gallery. I see the kitchen table I built from reclaimed oak, where Mary and I sat every morning for 50 years, drinking coffee and watching the sun come up. I see the sawdust in the floorboards from the time I made a rocking horse for a grandson I never got to meet. He pauses, his voice trembling but gaining a strange, quiet strength. To them, it's an obstacle. To me, it's the only place on this earth where I can still hear my wife's laughter. You can't revitalize a neighborhood by destroying the memories that built it. You're not building a future. You're just paving over the hearts of the people who made this city worth living in. The silence that follows isn't just respectful. It is heavy. It is the sound of an entire studio realizing that progress is often just a fancy word for erasure. Sterling tries to interject, to bring up the economic impact report again, but Boyd raises a single hand, silencing him instantly. Counselor, you mentioned that your clients have contracts with labor unions and steel suppliers, Boyd says, his voice turning cold and sharp. Well, I have a contract too. It's a contract between this bench and the citizens of this city. It's a contract that says no matter how many zeros you have in your bank account, you cannot use the law as a crowbar to pry a man out of his history. You said justice is blind. Well, today, she is taking off the blindfold, and she doesn't like what she sees. Boyd leans forward, his eyes fixed on the Vanguard legal team. I'm not just looking at a property dispute anymore. I'm looking at a pattern of predatory behavior that borders on the criminal. And if you think a $200 million project is too big to stop, you clearly haven't spent enough time in my courtroom. The powerful system is no longer looming. It is shaking. The lawyers for Vanguard are frantically texting on their phones, realizing that the man in the black robe isn't just protecting one innocent soul, he is preparing to dismantle an entire empire of greed. Elias Thorne isn't just a defendant anymore. He has become the conscience of the city, and Judge Boyd is about to deliver a blow that will echo far beyond these four walls. Marcus Sterling stands frozen, his hands still hovering over a stack of legal precedents that have suddenly become useless. He looks at the gallery, where the murmurs of the public have grown into a low, rhythmic thrum of indignation. He realized that the weight of the done has shifted. It is no longer about the $200 million project. It is about the survival of his own reputation. He clears his throat. His voice is high and strained. Your Honor, I must protest. This is no longer a civil hearing. You are overstepping your jurisdiction. If you move to halt this project based on emotional testimony and unverified audits, I will have no choice but to file for an immediate stay and report this to the Judicial Conduct Committee. You are playing to the cameras, not the law. It is the final, desperate threat of a cornered animal. Sterling is trying to use the system to intimidate the very man who administers it. He is betting that even Judge Boyd is afraid of the bureaucracy of his own profession. Judge Boyd doesn't move. He doesn't even blink. He slowly leans forward, his shadow falling across the bench like a dark tide. Counselor, you talk to me about jurisdiction as if it is a fence meant to keep justice out. You talk about playing to the cameras while your clients were playing with a man's life in an ICU hallway. Let me be very clear. I am not playing. I am presiding. And in this room, my jurisdiction is the truth. Boyd picks up a heavy, leather-bound volume of the state's penal and civil code. He doesn't open it. He simply sets it down with a thud that echoes like a gunshot. You mentioned the statute of limitations. You mentioned the sanctity of contracts. But you forgot about the doctrine of unconscionability. You forgot that a contract is void if it shocks the conscience of the court. And counselor, my conscience isn't just shocked, it is repulsed. The judge turns to the court recorder. Let the record reflect that the court finds the voluntary relocation agreement between the Vanguard Group and Elias Thorne to be a product of constructive fraud. It was obtained through predatory psychological manipulation during a period of extreme duress. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a criminal misappropriation of municipal housing grants. Sterling tries to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Your Honor, you can't. You don't have the authority to. I have the authority to protect the citizens of this city from being devoured by those who think they are above the law. Boyd thunders, his voice finally breaking into a roar that causes the lawyers at the Vanguard table to physically recoil. I am hereby issuing an immediate and indefinite injunction against all construction at the Vanguard Plaza site. Every crane stops, every shovel stays in the dirt, and I am referring this entire file, including your standard training script, to the Attorney General's office for a full criminal investigation into corporate fraud and elder abuse. A roar of approval erupts from the gallery. People are standing, clapping, some are even crying. Elias Thorne sinks back into his chair, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the weight of a burden he has carried alone for 6 months. He isn't just a victim anymore, he is a victor. Boyd looks back at Sterling, his eyes cold and final. You wanted to talk about the economic system, counselor? Well, here is an economic lesson for you. When you build an empire on a foundation of theft and sorrow, the only thing that's too big to fail is the crash when it all comes down. Vanguard wanted to buy Elias Thorne's history. Instead, they just bought themselves a front row seat to their own reckoning. The powerful system hasn't just been challenged, it has been dismantled. The wolves of Vanguard are no longer smirking. They are packing their bags in a panic, looking for the exits as the light of Judge Boyd's justice fills every corner of the room. But we aren't finished yet. There is one final act of restoration that needs to happen, and Judge Boyd is about to ensure that the innocent soul he protected doesn't just keep his house, but regains his peace. The echo of the gavel eventually fades, but the silence that follows in Judge Boyd's courtroom is not empty. It is a heavy, sacred quiet, the kind that settles over a place after a long-awaited truth has finally been exhaled. The lawyers for Vanguard have disappeared like shadows caught in a sudden glare, leaving behind only their abandoned briefcases and the scent of expensive cologne and desperation. But Elias Thorne remains. He is still sitting at the small wooden table, his shoulders no longer hunched under the weight of an invisible predator, but resting in the stillness of a man who has given his life back. Judge Boyd does not immediately leave the bench. He watches Elias for a long moment, his sharp, surgical gaze softening into something deeply human. He slowly removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and for the first time today, he stood up not to exert authority, but to bridge the distance. He walks down from the high chair, his black robes fluttering softly, and approaches the old man who was nearly erased by a system that valued steel over souls. Elias, Boyd says, his voice no longer a roar, but a gentle rumble that carries the warmth of a fireplace. Elias looks up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. Go home. Go back to that kitchen table. Drink your coffee and watch the sun come up. Your house is no longer an obstacle or a structure. It is yours. And I have made sure that the grant money meant for your roof is being redirected to a trust that no one, no matter how many lawyers they hire, can ever touch again. Elias tries to speak, his lips trembling, but the words won't come. Instead, he simply reaches out and takes Judge Boyd's hand. It is a moment that no standard training script could ever account for. The called hand of a craftsman meets the steady hand of a judge. In that grip, the powerful system was not just defeated, it was replaced by a covenant of respect. Months later, the site where the Vanguard Plaza was supposed to rise remains a patch of quiet earth. The cranes are gone. The wolves are tied up in grand jury investigations. But just down the street, at the corner of the neighborhood they called Decaying, a small house glows with light. There is a new roof of cedar shingles. The measurements of a daughter's height are still there on the door frame. And on the porch, Elias Thorne sits in a rocking chair he carved himself, listening to the wind chimes tinkle in the evening breeze. He can still hear Mary's laughter and the rustle of the leaves. The question we started with was, is justice truly blind? Today, Judge Boyd gave us the answer. Justice isn't blind. She is vigilant. She sees the microscopic text. She hears the whispers in the hospital hallway, and she knows the difference between a project and a person. She refuses to be a tool for the strong to crush the weak. She is the light that refuses to let the shadows have the final word. Sometimes, the most powerful thing in the world is not a $200 million corporation. It is one innocent soul that refuses to be bought, and one man on a bench who refuses to let them be sold. The Vanguard Group thought they were building a future. Instead, they reminded us that a future built on the ruins of the past is a house built on sand. If this story moves you, if you believe that accountability should never be a trade secret, then join us. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because there are more souls to protect and more systems to challenge. Drop a comment below. Do you believe one person can truly change a broken system? We want to hear your voice. This was the trial of Elias Thorne, but the lesson belongs to all of us. Justice has been served, the soul has been saved, and the home remains. Would you like me to generate a detailed aftermath and analysis post for your community tab or social media to accompany this video?